Welcome to iPad Pros, the show all about using your iPad to be productive and get work done. I'm Tim Chen, host of the show.
This episode is sponsored by Agenda 14. Learn more at agenda.com.
And there's a bunch of cool features, like you can do a thing called cursor chat, where you can just start typing and it appears next to your cursor. So if you're just like in a file and someone's doing some work and you really like it, you can go over and just be like, oh wow, this is really cool. How have you thought about this? It's that really nice balance between like synchronous and asynchronous work in one space. And you could have someone like editing like a shape with some text in, and one person could be changing the size of the shape and the color of it, and another person can be changing the text. So it's been really fun to have it on the iPad as well, for sure.
Welcome back to another episode of iPad Pros. On this episode is Robert Bai, the project manager of native apps at Figma. Figma is a collaborative design tool aimed primarily at website and app designers. It is available on the iPad via an awesome web app and native app that now has creation tools in its FigJam part of the app. In this episode, we deep dive into all things Figma and FigJam. As a reminder, this episode is sponsored by Agenda. Learn more at www.agenda.com, and I'll have a bit more to share about Agenda later on in this episode. With that, here's my interview with Robert. Enjoy. Welcome to the podcast, Robert. Can you first introduce yourself and how you use the iPad?
Yeah, it's great to be here. Yes, I'm Robert. I'm a product manager at Figma, and I work on some of our native products. So that's obviously the iPad, but also some of the mobile and desktop products as well. And yeah, I think like I use my iPad Pro quite a lot actually. So I do have like a MacBook, one of like the M1 MacBooks, like plugged into my desk, and it kind of sits there most of the time. And then whenever I kind of are working from like elsewhere and like from a sofa or from bed, or want to go for a coffee shop and work from there, that's when I kind of use my iPad. So I would say like a solid like 2-3 hours a day is like it's my primary device, and then I still have like a big 32-inch monitor for kind of like some like proper big multi-screen kind of work stuff.
And what's your current setup? What iPad Pro are you using?
I have the one that was just before the M1 series, sadly. So I bought it at a very bad time. But to be honest, I don't really notice it that much. So yeah, it's the 11-inch one. I have like the Magic Keyboard like folio thing as well. Yeah. And then I also actually have an iPad mini, the latest one, which I use for like my job and for like testing on. So I use that little one quite a lot, just like in the hand, in bed, kind of like watching things on it. But my main kind of work device is definitely the one with the keyboard.
Very cool. And do you have cellular on your 11-inch?
I don't actually. I tether to my phone often, what I do. So I kind of use that quite a bit.
Nice.
And then a lot of coffee shops nowadays are thankfully they have decent-ish Wi-Fi to a point, so I try and use that when I can.
And are you an Apple Pencil guy? And like having the new Gen 2, you can just magnetically just pop it on whichever one you're at, which would be nice.
Yeah, I do that quite a lot. It's funny, I leave it on my iPad mini most of the time because it kind of looks cute, and I sometimes use that for like note-taking and things like that on it. And even just like I sometimes find it's kind of easy to like pan around and scroll using it because it's kind of a less intrusive thing, especially if you're just like sitting on a sofa. It's kind of a nice way to kind of navigate around it. But I don't do much drawing on the smaller device. I usually do it on iPad Pros. I do like a bunch of like wireframe sketching and things like that is the kind of primary use case for it. But yeah, it's interesting. It is nice having the ability to jump between iPads, and it's definitely very privileged to be able to have two iPads as well, for sure.
And yeah, it does feel great just using the pencil for navigation. There's something tactile about it that just is a nice sensation.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like it's still great to be able to like use it and be able to like pinch the zoom and all that sort of other gestures as well. But I think it's just like web pages aren't very touch friendly, some of them, so it's kind of nice to be able to have that like precision for when you kind of want to like click a small link that's not great for like a stumpy finger, I guess.
Definitely, yeah. So any other general iPad topics you want to touch on before we move on to Figma and FigJam? I mean, I'm intrigued to see if you have any thoughts on like what's next and if there's anything going to be at WWDC in a few weeks, because iPads to me feel like they've got to a point where the spec bumps don't really make much of a difference. The format's pretty defined. So I'm like intrigued to see if you have any thoughts on like extra value Apple could add to like the hardware side of things at least. I mean, the Trackpad Magic Keyboard thing was a major change, and I think the next major change, hopefully we'll see like in a couple weeks here, is external display support, and that would be another Because the iPad, to me, it's been evolving. First we had Apple Pencil with, now we have the Trackpad. It's all about input, and like the more variety you can have in input and interaction styles, the better. And I think the external display is kind of the next hurdle of allowing more flexibility in usage.
Yeah, like that's, to be honest, that's still the reason I can't use it as more than I currently do, because when I plug it into a display, I don't want it to have the same like ratio and the same like
exactly.
zoomed in pixelness. And
it'd be nice to have like a 4-quadrant thing that's different from what your iPad main screen is doing down below.
Yeah, exactly. So, but I use it a bunch with like universal control and like a second screen, but it would be nice to be able to have it go back the other way. Especially because like most of my time is spent in like Slack and things like that. So yeah.
And if they add this, I'd love a clamshell mode where you can pair it with the Mac Magic Keyboard with the Touch ID, and you could do authentication from that Bluetooth Touch ID keyboard. And if you're pairing it with the Studio display, have that microphone and camera work with the iPad. That would all be just gravy for a really killer external display support.
Yeah, because I'm intrigued to see, because like with the processor, they haven't got like one of the Apple like A somethings in the display. So part of me thinks that they might support like over like wireless kind of display support from the iPad, and that could be like a really cool way to kind of connect backwards that way. But
I don't think there's a Wi-Fi chip inside the display itself is the problem. I think it's that chip. I'm not sure if it'll do anything outside of center stage and audio, spatial audio stuff. But I don't know. They might figure some other cool stuff out with it. But
yeah, definitely, it'd be cool to have that for sure.
Yeah, I'm very excited for WWDC, which when this episode comes out, I think will just be in a couple weeks here. So very exciting.
Yeah, so we won't make too many bad predictions then.
Right. So Figma. Now, for those that have never heard the word Figma before, what is Figma? Yeah,
so Figma is basically like a design platform. It's built for teams to kind of be able to like create products together. So things like websites and apps and a lot of things beyond that as well. And it's like originally and still is primarily like a web-based tool. And it's kind of used from teams from everything from like brainstorming through like designing. And it basically helps like teams work together to build great products, right from like idea through to kind of like handing it off to developers and stuff. So there's a lot of like things within that, but basically it's a collaborative tool that's designed for creating digital products with teams.
Okay, and we're talking like designing like user interfaces for basically digital interfaces, right? So you're looking at apps and interfaces there, and you're looking at websites and interfaces for that. Are there any other kind of broad products that Figma's good with working at?
Yes, I mean, like definitely that's the core of it, and like a lot of companies kind of designing Figma, so like Airbnb, Google, Microsoft, Netflix, like a lot of the big companies, everything you use has at some point existed as some pixels in Figma to kind of like design things out, and that's kind of like the core of kind of what Figma does and does really well. But then there's obviously a lot of use cases when you kind of have a kind of an almost infinite canvas to kind of create in. People use it for lots of different things as well. So you get people using it for like illustration or kind of doing like floor plan layouts for like a new kind of building, or even just like basically anything that involves putting shapes and textures and things onto a canvas, people use it for. So yeah, it's very, very varied, and you see a lot of very innovative use cases as well of it.
Very cool. And brand new to Figma is this iPad app called FigJam. So what's this new app all about?
Yeah, so FigJam launched in beta on web last year, and it came out of beta about 2 months ago now. And it's basically, if you think of like Figma as a place to kind of design like user interfaces and a place to kind of be able to design stuff that is ready to hand off for engineering, ready for builds, FigJam is basically like the first part of that process and a lot more as well. So it's effectively like an online whiteboarding tool. It allows teams to kind of like ideate, brainstorm together, run workshops, and it's primarily designed for like the early stages of design process. So like wireframe sketching, things like that. But kind of more and more we're seeing it used by people just for like in meetings and remote work, and to really kind of be a fun and enjoyable kind of place to like collaborate and like sketch ideas out together. So it's a very, very broad sense. And then we launched it on iPad just over a month ago now, which is kind of really interesting. And it's obviously the core product's the same, but just the way people use it on iPad is like increasingly different and really, really interesting, because people generally are like doing more solo work on it and doing more kind of like deep dive brainstorming things, whereas obviously on web it's a lot more focused around like collaboration and kind of like synchronous meeting time as well.
And the collaboration, is it like a Google Docs where you're having multiple people in there and you're seeing stuff move around inside a design or a FigJam?
Yeah, definitely. It's kind of, yeah, if you imagine like how Google Docs work, this is kind of the next level up. So not only do you see like what people are selecting, you actually can see their cursors, and the cursors kind of move around the screen, so you can not only see what they're changing, but also like their actual position on the canvas. And that in itself is like a really, really cool thing, because it kind of has that sense of like being in the same room together, even when you're remotely. And there's a bunch of cool features, like you can do a thing called cursor chat, where you can just start typing and it appears next to your cursor. So if you're just like in a file and someone's doing some work and you really like it, you can go over and just be like, oh wow, this is really cool, how you thought about this. And it's kind of, it's that really nice balance between like synchronous and asynchronous work in one space. And it's been really fun to have it on the iPad as well, for sure.
Nice. And how do you guys handle if two people are trying to move the same kind of element of a document around?
You have to ask some of our the founders who worked on that. There's a lot of amazing things with around like how do you like live merge changes. So you could have someone like in a editing like a shape with some text in, and one person could be changing the size of the shape and the color of it, and another person can be changing the text. So it's a very, very powerful tool that it has that like true synchronous collaboration. And technically wise, I'm sure there's some blog posts written about how it works, but it's very cool to see when you're kind of doing things like that with someone else.
Yeah, because Google Docs, I understand it's text, but Figma and FigJam, it's like all sorts of other things outside of the simple solution of text. So that's
and it, like you get people like editing like drop shadows and color gradients and formatting and grouping, and on FigJam the same thing as well. You can have like people sketching over the things at the same time, and there's a lot of stuff going on. And I think that's what's like really powerful about it being kind of web-based, is that it works on iPads, it works on Windows, it works on Macs, it works on browser, it works on Chromebook, and everyone kind of gets the same experience on all platforms, which I think's really, really powerful, and makes it like very easy for anyone to kind of access this tool. You don't need like a very powerful like $2,000 M1 MacBook to kind of use it, so it's great for that.
Yeah, and with FigJam, you guys had a beta process. During that process, did you guys discover just creative uses that I'm now seeing in the templates, that there seems to be a lot of uses beyond what Figma's core, job is all about with web design and app design? There's a lot of just very different uses of FigJam that I've seen in there. Yeah,
definitely. And I mean, like, I'm not a designer, like a product manager, so most of my time is spent like talking to teams and making sure we're like building the right things for our kind of like customer base, and making sure we're doing the right, like launching the stuff that people really enjoy using. And I think what's fascinating is like I probably spend like 80% of my time in FigJam, not Figma. So I use Figma obviously to kind of work with the designers and give feedback and those sort of things, but a lot of my time is spent kind of, we use it for like building roadmaps, we use it for kind of doing sprint reviews, we use it for team meetings. People are sharing like updates of like, have they got a new dog, and kind of like sharing photos of that in a meeting. And I think it's like you said, like the template stuff's like crazy to see how people in the community come together and create really interesting things that you wouldn't think of. So there's genuinely a template for everything, and it's a very exciting place to kind of be. And one thing I like as well is like creating our own templates internally. So we have a weekly kind of all hands meeting with everyone on the native team, and we use a single template for that. And you can kind of create your own things and keep coming back to them, which is, it's nice because it makes a white blank canvas can be intimidating, but when you kind of start with a template, it makes it like super easy to kind of start from there.
What have been some of your favorite templates you've seen created by the community since release?
Yeah, so I think like some of the ones I really enjoy is like, it sounds very bland but really useful, is like retro templates for like once you've shipped something, like how you can kind of collate feedback, and you can get everyone from the team kind of like sharing their kind of like insights of like what went well, what didn't go well. And some of the times like those templates by community are amazing for that. And I think also just how people have made some like really cool like to-do lists, and like similar to kind of how people share their like Notion template pages. They're kind of starting to see some of those things happening with FigJam, where people are adapting things to like, here's a really cool like how I manage my week as a product manager, and a template for that. And there's a lot of really interesting use cases there for sure.
Very cool. So before we dive all the way deep into FigJam, I want to bounce back to Figma just briefly here. So the Figma iPad app is mostly like a view-only kind of experience right now. Then I hopped on Safari, and it's a very wonderful like web app where you can do all of the creation work right there in Safari, especially if you have an external trackpad. Seems very iPad friendly on that end of things. Are there any aspects of the web app that need like a desktop browser, or is all of that pretty fully functional within Safari on iPad if you have like a trackpad?
Yes, I mean, like technically speaking, it does work pretty well in the kind of Safari mobile browser. Definitely on iPad, and when you have a kind of a cursor and a keyboard. But one of the kind of reasons we're still not launching that, like, and we're looking into it, is just around kind of the core use cases of iPad. And iPads are like much more like gestural experiences. They're much more like, I guess, like fast flowing and like imprecise is kind of a way of doing it, and that saying that in like a positive sense as well. Right. And I think when it comes to like Figma design, it is a precision tool where you're trying to get like pixel perfect designs, and interacting that with like fingers and kind of a like inverted commas cursor, which is like a kind of the dots. It's still not hyper precise, and it does work in the browser and you can do some things, but it's just not at the level of experience which we'd be happy with, like at Figma. So it's something that we're always looking at, and a lot of our community always want to have like Figma editing on iPad. But when we kind of looked at it and started using FigJam, FigJam is definitely the place where we kind of wanted to start from, because it instantly feels very at home in a touch environment, and that kind of fluidity and that feeling of control, I think, is what the iPad excels at. So it's not something that we're like necessarily going to do, but it's something that we're definitely looking at, is kind of the more higher fidelity aspects of it. But there's still a lot of value in viewing files and collaborating on the go. And I really enjoy being able to like have our designer share some mocks and some designs, and I can jump into the file, have a pan around, and I can kind of like jump on a call with them and give feedback. So there's definitely value in there, but I think it's an area that we are exploring for sure.
Yeah. I think the trackpad and Apple Pencil combo creates some interesting input opportunities, especially with the trackpad being you're able to customize in a native app what that trackpad actually looks like and does. So you can do some pretty interesting things on that angle.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's one of those things where iPads are very complex to build for, because you have to always assume that someone just has an iPad and they won't have the pencil, and they won't have the keyboard, and they won't have the touchpad, and the experience is so vastly different between those like input things. And it's one of the most enjoyable products, like as in one of the most enjoyable like hardware devices to build for, because you have like almost infinite variations. And it's like there's moments where someone will be using like two fingers on the trackpad to pinch to zoom whilst using Apple Pencil to draw, and then there's someone who's like using keyboard shortcuts, and there's someone who's just using a single finger to like poke around. And it's a challenge to work for, and I think it's also a challenge because you don't get full insight into what devices a user has, so you kind of don't know how to present the UI. So it's something that we're always looking at, and I think it's a very fun challenge and a very entertaining product to kind of design for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting because like on like PlayStation, for example, there's certain games that it's like, oh, VR required, or like some certain controller features required, and if you're using like a third-party controller, this just won't work. On iPad and Apple's App Store, there is no like magic keyboard required.
Yeah,
like,
true.
Yeah, there's none of that. It's just like every app should work. And on the Mac, you have every Mac's going to have some kind of pointing device, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I kind of approve and like appreciate how Apple has kind of done that, because you end up in a situation with like some Windows computers where you haven't got the right drivers, or you haven't got the hardware, and it is nice kind of knowing that everything should be optimized for all experiences. But it does put the lift on the kind of like product and engineering teams to kind of think around that and think about all those use cases. So I imagine that's probably one of the reasons there's not touchscreens on Macs yet, is because there's a lot of complexity when you start adding new input methods for sure.
Yeah, definitely. So one idea that someone shared with me a couple episodes back was the potential of like in the future of coding, and we were talking about Swift UI and like how I hate designing, I'm not a developer, but the one part, I'd love a purely graphical way of designing a user interface like Figma does. And the idea of perhaps exporting a Figma project as Swift UI, they could just copy and paste this code in the like playgrounds on iPad or an Xcode file, and you'd have your preliminary UI work all done. Is that something that's even like remotely a possibility, the way coding works and Figma's like graphical stuff works and all that?
Yes, I mean, like it kind of like design to code and like dev tools is something that we always explore, and like our user base consists of everyone from like product managers like myself through to designers through to engineers, and we're always looking at ways to kind of like close that loop and make it really useful for everyone. And I think like we have our kind of like inspect tools at the moment, which provides like some utility to like engineers and developers, but that's something that we really want to kind of like, there's a lot of value there, and I think there's a lot of engineers who would love to see that better. So it's including everyone in the design process and that like product process is really important to us. So yeah, I'm sure at some point there'll be some things adding there as well. And you can already see like some elements of code on like in CSS, iOS and Android when you're kind of in that inspect mode. So it's something that like we're always looking to add more value to the people who use the product. So I'm sure it's something that we'll do at some point.
Very cool. And in Figma, I'm not super familiar with, like, if you add a button in Figma, can you tell when you, like, is there like a simulator mode where you're like in a live preview where you tap on a button and it opens up a different screen and you can kind of like make a fake app almost within Figma? Is that?
Yeah, no, you can do like really powerful stuff. There's a whole like prototyping functionality, which is amazing, where you can kind of like have components in different states and they can link to each other, and you can get things feeding very, very real, a lot faster than coding as well to a point. And I think a lot of people use that for kind of user testing, and that kind of links quite nicely with like what we do in the mobile app, where we allow people to view prototypes on their phones. So a designer can kind of create an experience, have various user journeys, various like button states, have them all kind of like interact with each other and feel very real, like right down to kind of like hover over states and tap states. Like all those things can be kind of like built.
Nice.
And then you can view it on your phone as a prototype, which then is like has like no Chrome, so it's like
right.
Full screen, full bleed, and it feels like a native app, and you can then really play around with it. So that is like something I've used like in my past life as a designer, is like mocking things up, showing people, having them poke around it, and it means you can get feedback really, really quickly from users without having to kind of even write a line of code. So there's like a lot of value there in prototyping, and it's a very surprisingly fun thing to start doing when you start seeing these really cool like transitions and built-in like animation curves and stuff as well.
Yeah, I was just thinking web design, it'd be so cool to be able to export HTML from a Figma project and just, you know, I remember the days I used to use like Rapid Weaver to make websites, and it was a fully graphical way of just what you see is what you get in uploads, and there it is.
Yeah, it'd be amazing to just have like a upload to web and it just works. That would be like that would be phenomenal. Yeah.
This episode of iPad Pros is sponsored by Agenda. In this quick break, I want to share a little bit about why I love their approach to notes. Agenda, if you haven't tried it out, is a great note-taking app that really thoughtfully integrates your calendar and reminders into your notes. If you have a meeting coming up, you can use an agenda note to prepare for that meeting and have all of the information related to that meeting on hand. If you use the whiteboard at that meeting, you can also use Agenda to capture that whiteboard with your camera and include it with your notes, so whatever work that needs to be done after is all in one place. And now with Agenda 14, linking to other notes has never been easier, making gathering up all of the relevant notes easier than ever. I also love the organization system in Agenda. You can divide out the main aspects of your life or job, and from those main categories create different projects for everything you are working on. And the new smart system in Agenda 14 allows you to auto-hide the projects that you haven't touched in a while, helping you focus on your active projects. Your notes, unlike a task manager, have a few different states that is all conveyed through a single radio button. Filled in yellow indicates your task is on the agenda, where it is up top of mind and shown in a special on the agenda view, letting you view everything important in your life from all of your projects all in one place. A simple tap of the radio button lets you take it off the agenda or mark it as done if the note has a completion state you want to indicate. If you've ever tried using a task manager to take notes and were frustrated by that experience, give Agenda a try. It's the note-taking app that actually helps you stay on track with work and personal projects. Each agenda note can be linked to a calendar event, and once you link that note, it'll tell you that in the header of that note. And if it's coming up, it'll say, hey, tomorrow at 10:30 a.m., you have this meeting coming up, and here's the note that you need to be working on to be ready for that meeting. The powerful integration with the calendar reminder system is something that I use constantly and something I find super helpful, making sure I stay on track with upcoming meetings that I have. Best of all, the app is loaded to the brim with keyboard shortcuts, letting you navigate with ease. And now with Agenda 14, the app is more keyboard friendly than ever. Listen to the last 2 episodes of this podcast for details on the incredible new smart entry bar, now included in Agenda 14. Another thing I just love about Agenda is their business model. When you upgrade to get all of the premium Agenda features, you aren't signing up for a yearly subscription plan. You get to keep every premium feature that's released in the next 12 months, and only if Agenda delivers new premium features you think are worth paying for, do you have to pay again. The developers are constantly working on making you happy as a premium customer to earn your business again and again. If you do decide that you actually do want a subscription, so you don't need to remember to sign up next year when you want the new features, there is also now that subscription option that gives you a discount over the standard premium price. And just like buying premium, you get to keep all of the features of premium if you decide to cancel that subscription. So there's no harm in subscribing and getting that discount. To learn more, go to agenda.com. That's www.agenda.com. And download Agenda today for free from the App Store to get started. My thanks again to Agenda for sponsoring this episode of iPad Pros. Learn more at agenda.com. So, back to FigJam. Something I noticed right away is the idea of this timer. You have, I think you can set the different durations, but I think it's all 15 minutes to like jam out an idea. Is that something you're seeing a lot of use of like, we have 15 minutes, let's get this little project done, then move on to something else?
Yeah, I think like time is an interesting one. And I think like I use it a lot in meetings when we're kind of like, oh, let's spend like 15 minutes just playing around with these ideas and we'll come back and like share them with each other. And the cool thing is the timer like is in sync between everyone. So it's not like a timer on just your computer or your iPad. It's in sync across everyone who's in the file at the moment. So
you don't have to have one bad person say, time's up, and everyone else is like,
yeah, exactly. And it pings on it, like there's like a nice little sound effect that like plays on everyone's computers, and you can see it in the top corner the whole time as well. So yeah, that's kind of nice just for like if you're in like a big meeting and you need to take away like either like 5 minutes to have like a break to go make a cup of tea or something, you can kind of do that. Or it can be more work based where is like, let's spend 5 minutes like writing out ideas around this thing and then sharing them back. So that's kind of like the collaborative use case. But individually I use it a bit when it's like, oh, I have a meeting in 20 minutes and I want to do some work. I can just like work in FigJam, set a timer, then I'm not late for a meeting, which is quite nice. So yeah, there's a lot of different uses for sure.
So internally, how do you guys use Figma and FigJam to like improve the products themselves? I'd imagine these products are actually really great at improving the actual product that you're building with Figma.
Yeah, there's definitely some like level of meta-ness right. When you're kind of like, there's times when we are like designing the iPad app on our like desktop product, and then we're showing how you would show an iPhone prototype on the iPad app. So there's like 3 levels deep of like Figma screens. So it's the tools obviously we use to build it, and I think like a lot of the product team, and we use FigJam so much, and like we use it for like a lot of our like quarterly business reviews, for lots of strategy meetings, from like sketching out ideas to kind of like team socials where we do like quick drawing competitions. So there's like I think what's really interesting with a tool like especially like FigJam is you can use it for very, very important, very like business critical meetings, and it has that level of fidelity where you can create like really tightly knit and organized like presentations in like FigJam, but you can also use it as like a very, very scrappy kind of collaboration tool. And I think it's been one of like the biggest game changers for like, at least in my workflow, kind of how we use it all the time. And I think it's a very, very powerful tool. And one of the really, really cool aspects is you can create stuff like in Figma design, and you can kind of create interesting like components with different states and different like drop downs and different color states, and then you can copy paste those like into FigJam. So we have like in our like weekly team sprint review, we have a little like tool thing we built which shows just a like what you're working on this week, what's the status of it, like how far along the timeline are you on working on it, and people can like update those components in FigJam, and they've been like custom designed for like our team. So it's a really flexible tool, and when partnered with like Figma as well, you can really shape it to the sort of product you need, alongside the kind of more looser kind of aspects of like drawing and sketching.
Very cool. And in FigJam, what kind of tools are available to, like, there's shapes and different things you can use in your project? What kind of tools are available in there for people to use?
Yes, I mean there's the kind of the like obvious ones to a point. So there's like a pen tool, like a highlighter tool, there's like an eraser, then there's like post-it notes as well, and like text box. So they're all kind of like the kind of expected ones. And I think what's really interesting is there's some kind of like really cool new features with like a thing called like sections, which basically allows you to like create like a mini area in your whiteboard, and we use that for like organizing either like stages of workshops or other aspects. And then there's like a few fun features, like we have like a washi tape thing that we launched on our like April Fun Day that people like really liked and wanted us to kind of keep using. And so that's like graphic tape you can lay around in the file, makes it quite fun as well. But then there's like the really powerful tool sets of like what we call like widgets, which are like interactive things that have been coded and built by people. So you can get things like activity trackers, like bar charts, you can get like a voting tool, an alignment scale, and all these like really powerful tools that have been built by our community that you can kind of download and add, and they're all like web-based and interactive. And there's even things like a weather widget that tells you weather in your location, so if you're in a meeting with people, you can all add in your own location, your weather, and it will like show that thing. So there's like such a big breadth of stuff, and I think the fact that people can build their own widgets as well is like a really, really powerful way of kind of like adding more value to like a canvas as well.
Very cool. And the widgets, how do you get those into the iPad from the community? Is there some kind of, do you have to go through Safari, or is that actually in the iPad app?
So that's coming soon to iPad. At the moment, you can use them. So like if someone on web adds it to the canvas you're in, you can use it. But we're looking at how to kind of bring that to iPad soon. There's a lot of complexity around kind of like how to search and find those things, and we want to kind of deliver it correctly. So, but yeah, that will be coming soon to iPad. But in the meantime, you can go to like the FigJam in your browser on desktop and see it there.
Cool. Yeah, I know. OmniGraffle has a bunch of community stuff, and they have like within their app the access to that, and that'll be really cool to see when FigJam has all that community stuff right within the app, because those widgets sound super powerful. Like I could see people building out a little dashboard just for themselves with these widgets. Yeah,
definitely. I mean, like people kind of code up really cool stuff, and yeah, there's like the kind of simpler tools like tables and calendars, but there's a lot of complex things you can build, like even like stock trackers. Like you can just have things like that, which is quite fun. And yeah, there's a lot of joy in FigJam, and like there's like tic-tac-toe and like rock paper scissors, and there's lots of fun things like that. Yeah. So yeah, there's lots of cool ways to kind of like use FigJam and use the widgets to kind of like really elevate how you kind of do meetings and stuff.
And then I saw stamps being a thing in FigJam, and kind of different from what I initially thought they'd be for it. It's kind of like a way of signaling as you're real-time collaborating if you like this aspect of design. And have you seen stamps being utilized since release?
Yeah, so we there's like thumbs up, thumbs down, heart emojis, like question marks, +1s. That's kind of most of them. But so we use that a lot for like if you're reading someone's post-it note in like a workshop, you can just +1 it, which kind of obviously indicates that. And there's actually a widget for like +1ing that, then you can click and it makes it into like +2, +3, etc. But there's also like you get there's a stamp like of your own face as well, which is really cool. So if you're kind of like doing a voting thing and you want to kind of like see, or like an alignment scale to see where you agree, you can kind of use that stamp to kind of indicate what you want to do. So we use those in like meetings to kind of indicate what your focus is on like a bunch of different areas. You can like stamp what your focus is on this week. But then just in general, it's like there's a lot of ways of like background interaction. So there's obviously like in a meeting or like a workshop, there's someone who's leading it, but everyone else who's collaborating has different ways to kind of communicate and get involved. So like cursor chat, like I mentioned, but stamps is another great way of kind of expressing that as well.
Very cool. And then something I thought was really nifty is the ability to include code snippets in a FigJam project. And there's support for a bunch of languages, Swift, C++, Ruby, and I think 14 languages in total. So when you put that code in, is it rendering that, or is it just like telling the app to like, this is code and treat it somehow differently, or what's the use of this?
Yes, I haven't actually used it that much myself. I like the times we have used it being for just like sharing code snippets like in meetings. But also we kind of use it as like a fun text field as well sometimes, so like not for its real use case. But I imagine it's like on like engineering meetings, maybe people use those a bit more. But it's kind of an interesting way of just like having people to like share code and share it like formatted in the correct way as well.
Nice. Yeah, so you actually tell it what type of code this is, so it's going to format it appropriately for that code. It's not going to like try to input some stuff that shouldn't be in the code.
Yeah, exactly that. Yeah, exactly.
Gotcha. Okay. And then on the iPad, you also have the ability to input import media, and I think this is both video and photos. Is that right?
I haven't
just
actually
photos?
tried video, but I know it works with photos and GIFs. I know that much. I'll try video after this and see if it works.
Yeah, I think video might get a bit large.
Yeah, I imagine. Like, I think you can do like embedded YouTube videos and stuff. But I haven't actually tried that myself. So yeah, but the media is like really handy. Is like I use it on my iPad a lot for like if I'm working on like some like new kind of concepts and more strategy stuff. We can just go and pull images from the web and just drag and drop it straight in. You can use it in like split view as well, and it's really handy for that. But yeah, also we use it in like our team meetings. Every week we kind of share what our focus is on. We share like a personal update, which might be like, as I said, like someone just got a new puppy recently. So we have our weekly puppy update, and there's a photo usually of that as well. So it's like a fun way to kind of add a bit more like richer kind of content to it. And then from like a more kind of work standpoint as well, you can add in things of brainstorms. You can use a camera on your iPad to kind of take a photo, some like hand-drawn sketches, and then you can kind of riff on those and build out from there as well. So it's just kind of, we're starting to look at like how we can take advantage of some of the uniqueness of iPad and how it's got multiple kind of inputs. And I think those things are going to add like a lot of value kind of in the future when we're kind of using things like the front and back facing camera and able to kind of interact in that way as well.
Have you guys experimented with the scanning feature that's system-wide on iPad, like ability to just scan within Figma to like a FigJam?
We haven't actually. That's we should look at that, because that's quite an interesting thing of like how you can combine like 2D paper sketches and scan them in and have them imported as like something you can actually interact with on your in FigJam. So yeah, there's a bunch of stuff that we're only just starting to tap into, and there's obviously like the true depth camera, and there's some opportunities around like AR as well. So there's definitely, we're just starting to kind of tap into all the areas that we could use the iPad for.
Yeah, and one area I'm curious about is Apple Pencil. Any advantage of using the pencil outside just extra precision currently?
Yeah, so there's going to be, I think we've implemented like the double tap to switch between like the eraser and the pen kind of tool, but I think over time we're going to add a lot more value there as well. There's a lot of work we want to do around like gestures and like undo, redo, like panning, and I think obviously you get like a lot of extra kind of input about like pressure sensitivity as well. So that's an area again we kind of are just starting to explore on iPad, and we're always aiming to kind of improve how it feels to use. And I think the pencil there's a way we can go to make it feel really, really nice.
Cool. Yeah. And you mentioned gestures. Are there any kind of like hidden gestures in FigJam that aren't immediately obvious?
So not like specific to iPad. There's a bunch of like fun little quirks you can do. So like one of them is like if you're in like the cursor chat thing, there's certain like words that make animations happen. So if you're like writing like love this or something, the word love indicates like heart emojis coming out of it. Or if you start putting exclamation points after the word, it kind of starts shaking the bubble as well. So there's like some like emotion that you try and bring in, which I think like the FigJam team and Figma as a whole does really well. And I'm sure we'll start doing cool things like that on iPads, because there's like a lot of cool inputs you get from iPad, which we can definitely do some fun things with. So yeah, keep trying stuff, because like there's a lot of fun little hidden features that we do add and we do play around with.
Right, yeah. And something I did notice right away is keyboard shortcuts are plentiful in FigJam. Do you have any favorites that you use when you're working in that?
Yeah, so I mean, like there's the ones to like jump between tools as well. So like I think it's like S is for sticky notes, L's for line, all those kind of useful ones. Then there's a kind of like the like fun things with just like grouping stuff, aligning stuff, and quick ways of doing those ones. So I think just like keeping those into like general like usage is like I'm like a pretty heavy keyboard shortcut user, and have one of those little like Elgato desk mini display shortcutty things that I have a bunch of shortcuts set up for FigJam as well. So there's like there's some cool stuff you can do, and I think like there's definitely some like the auto tidying stuff. So you have like a bunch of post-it notes. There's like I think it's like Control Alt T just like ties it up into like a grid for you automatically, and there's a bunch of really useful things there for sure.
Nice. And has your team looked into the iPad OS ability to hold like the command key to show all the available shortcuts? Yeah,
that's a system-wide thing that we probably should do. We do have a way of I think it's Command / kind of brings up like the quick menu, and then you can show keyboard shortcuts. if you type that in, and then there's like a little thing that comes out the bottom, and that will show you like all of the keyboard shortcuts and also highlight the ones you've already used. So that's quite a nice way to like help discover like what things are useful to you. But yeah, the native implementation is would probably be quite handy, especially when there's like a dearth of shortcuts in FigJam as well.
Yeah, and then you could type a couple letters to filter out what you're looking for shortcuts. Yeah, that'd be cool.
Exactly, yeah.
Apple shortcuts, automation, is that something that has the community expressed any kind of like cool uses of what they'd like to see there eventually?
I haven't actually seen much of that mentioned kind of on like things like Twitter yet, but I think there's Apple Shortcuts is definitely like a pro iPad user level. But I imagine a lot of people who use FigJam are kind of like, and Figma are like interested in those things. So I imagine there's some cool stuff we could do with like bringing in content from other apps and automating some things. So yeah, I think that's something that we should probably like, it'll be an interesting thing to look at to see where and if there's some interesting value there.
Yeah, for sure. And is there ability to link to like a FigJam? So say if I have a calendar event, could I, in that calendar event, have a link to a FigJam and it opens up FigJam on my iPad to that document? Is that something?
Yeah, so like often what we have is like you can either link to like a folder, which you can use for like a standing meeting where you always create a new one in there, or you can just share a URL of the FigJam kind of file. So every time you create a file, there is a URL and you can add that to a calendar event. So nice. We do that quite a lot for like meetings or like kind of QBR type things where the document has already been made and we're kind of aiming to come in to kind of have discussion around it. So you can share that out and share it as part of the event as well. So yeah, it's really, really handy for that.
Very cool. And any cool stories since you've launched FigJam on iPad from the community, you know, ways you've seen FigJam used that kind of surprised you?
Yeah, I mean, it's always really nice when you launch something and then you see not only like it being used in the way you assumed it will be, because like one of the areas that we always felt would be a big part of FigJam on iPad is kind of wireframing and just letting people kind of sketch out interfaces before they kind of go into design in Figma and then get developed. And we've seen a few people do like YouTube videos like walking through it and showing how they kind of use that. And that's always it's always nice to see how you think something would work kind of like come to fruition and actually be used in that way. But I think like equally as satisfying is seeing it used in like really interesting ways. So seeing people do like mood boarding or seeing people like planning an event in it or just like using it as like a really cool and really powerful note-taking tool. That's always really fun. So yeah, I have a lot of automated Twitter searches and alerts popping up. So if anyone does anything cool and they kind of share it, it definitely gets seen by us. And we do like a lot of those tweets end up in our like channels in Slack, and people are like always like, oh, that's a really cool way of doing it, or like, oh wow, that's a really fun thing. If we did these things, that can make that even better. So Figma's an amazing company where we are like listening to the community and listening to kind of our customer base and all our users. And I think it's often like an interesting use case can suddenly end up being a feature that gets shipped in like a few months' time. So yeah, we're aware of those like fun edge cases that were really kind of cool to see.
Very cool. And is there like a proper workflow of getting from FigJam to Figma proper? Is there a migration stuff, or is it mostly here's a reference document to build from and start from scratch in Figma proper? Yeah,
so you can just copy and paste between them. So you can just like select anything and they work kind of equally in both. Okay. And that's what's really cool. So you can copy and paste like a whole complex design file straight into like FigJam, and then you can kind of like sketch over and iterate on it. So there's a lot of like really fun ways of doing things. So for instance, we've seen people like do some wireframe sketching on FigJam on their iPad. They then go to FigJam on their computer, have a quick look at it, tidy it up, and then copy and paste those hand-drawn sketches into Figma itself, and then actually design the final like production-ready app alongside those sketches. So that's one really cool aspect of like the two products that we have at Figma, is that things do work like well between them. So you can kind of move content between the things really easily. And then in a more kind of like tangible approach, you can like, we use Figma Design for creating our own like presentations and like pitch decks in, and then we kind of paste those into FigJam, and then people can like stick post-it notes and sketch over them as well. So there's definitely like coming from both angles, that is a really fun experience.
Yeah, and I just thought universal control must be pretty cool, being able to just copy, you know, if you have your iPad sitting next to a Mac, you can just copy from FigJam and then, you know, copy over to your Mac, or I don't even know how. Drag and drop probably wouldn't work that well because you're dragging an element from the
I
FigJam
haven't
app,
actually tried that. It might work. It's one of those things to try. But yeah, copy and pasting definitely works. And I have done that a bunch between, like, if I'm on like a Zoom meeting with people, I have that on my monitor. Then I have my iPad with the like FigJam file open so I can like be more involved and sketch in it. And then you can kind of like copy things back and forward and move between them. So yeah, universal control is definitely like a bit of a game changer with kind of like making your iPad more useful on your desk. And I personally think there's a lot of really cool things that we could do to kind of leverage that a bit more, especially when you're kind of like doing design work in Figma itself. Like, what could you do on the iPad that you could then like leverage? So yeah, there's a bunch of really cool things that I imagine a lot of companies are seeing kind of the new opportunity with universal control and being like, this is a really cool, very seamless experience, and it works better than any of us hoped for. So I think there's going to be some really cool features soon.
Yeah, something cool I heard is you can actually use the Magic Trackpad on the iPad to control your Mac, which is like the opposite, which is nice.
Yeah, that was I did that like accidentally recently, and then it was like, where's my cursor? And then I found it on my computer and was like, oh, I did not realize that. That's very, very cool. So it's kind of makes me want to have like a Mac plugged into like a 60-inch TV and then sit on my sofa and work from my iPad, and that would be like really cool. So yeah, we can dream with that.
Yeah, I heard someone talk about that of that use case of using the iPad to like control their TV or something, having like a Mac Mini as like a media center thing up there.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I think it's like there's a lot of fun stuff that could happen there for sure. So yeah, I think like that my brain's spinning already, being like, how could we do some cool stuff? So yeah, I think I'll probably think about that later today.
Anything we haven't touched on that you'd like to before you wrap it up?
Not massively. I think it's like I think it's a really interesting time to be like not only like iPad users, because there's so many professional tools coming to it, but like being kind of creating products for iPads a really interesting time. And I think it's amazing seeing like other teams and other product teams create like really cool experiences, and even basic stuff like the new kind of Slack update on iPad just made it feel amazing. And like, I now want that interface on my computer because it feels better than Slack on my desktop. So yeah, there's a lot of really cool stuff coming out, and yeah, I'll be intrigued to kind of hear from you either now or like in the future, kind of like areas you think that was like professional usage of iPads is changing, because I think it's like I feel like for me at least we're on the cusp of kind of it becoming that single use thing. Definitely the external monitor support is the area that it feels like it's lacking at the most, at least.
Yeah, for sure. I'd love to just like get out of desk and even use clamshell mode and just like pop it down, and it's this like silent, cool little portable desktop computer that is also a tablet. Yeah,
definitely. I have my MacBook is a very expensive aluminium block on my desk that doesn't really get used that much. So I'm just like, it feels like there's some cool stuff. When you have like a similar processor in both, it's like, I think this could be leveraged a bit more. So yeah, maybe one day iPads will be a single device, but they're a really cool like partner product at the moment, and I think it's at some point that like balance will sway, and iPads will become like 80% of the user time, and then maybe only occasionally using like a big desktop kind of for those other things.
Yeah, and then FigJam you can download for free, and you get 2 projects that you can just use, and then after that it's that's when it starts to cost money for the user.
Yeah, it's free to kind of use for like yourself and to like create a few files and to play around with. So I think just go to like figma.com and then you can create like and play around with like Figma files and FigJam files, and the same on iPad as well. You can kind of download and start playing with it. And then there's like, I think we're at Figma on Twitter as well, and the team's pretty active on there and does some really cool stuff. And people, I think we often try and share like interesting things made by the community as well. So I often follow the Figma account on Twitter, and I get some like really cool ideas from people making amazing things on there. So yeah, definitely, it's definitely worth a try and to kind of play with, and just kind of, it's rare to get a really interesting product that works very seamlessly across different surfaces, different platforms, and it's really fun to work on it, and it's just as fun to kind of use it as well.
Very cool. Well, yeah, thank you so much, Robert, for your time today. It's been great chatting, learning more about Figma.
No worries. Thanks for having me as well. It's great to chat and kind of hear kind of outside perspectives of what we're doing as well.
Well, that's my interview with Robert. My thanks to Robert for his time recording this interview, and my thanks to you for your time and attention tuning in. If you want to support the podcast, open up the App Store now and download Agenda. It's a free download and something I'd really encourage you to at least give a shot. It's one of my favorite apps that I continue to use to produce this very podcast and stay organized with all the interviews and things I have coming up for it. Learn more at www.agenda.com. You can also support the podcast by going to patreon.com/iPadPros or subscribing in Apple Podcasts. my sincere and heartfelt thanks to everyone that does support the podcast financially over there. With that, thanks for listening, and I'll talk to everyone again real soon.